Talk to me about insider threats. Is it impossible to stop them 100% of the time?
It's a bit of a stretch if you say like anything in security is an impossibility. It's a hard problem because it deals with people. And we're getting beyond just the idea of, hey, everything on a network that flows on a network can be controlled. You're talking about somebody who can use a smartphone to take a screenshot of a desktop like image and then just, pull the data from it because, iPhones are good enough now to be able to read text and copy it down. And then whether they load it up somewhere, the hell, they can print it out and take it somewhere. It's a very different type of vector than what we currently see at a big level, right? Because you're seeing a lot more phishing. You're still seeing a lot more just straight up, kind of normal networking type of behavior that you would expect to see and stop. So it's just, it comes at it from side channel. It's a very different type of thing. So it requires a little bit of a different mindset.
Fully agree. Especially with the consideration of using low tech methods to bypass high tech protections. It's a common issue that we're seeing more and more these days. Again, like you said, the human element is the hardest part of that. Identifying vectors and side channels, as well as making software or hardware to solve the problem. That's the easy part. The human element is always going to be the hard part in that one. But I don't think it's impossible. It's hard. It's a hard problem to solve, though.
Where would you guys start if you had to build out a program to, I guess, what's the question here? Is it understanding insider threats, mitigating insider threats? Because I think we all agree here, it's incredibly hard to stop them all the time.
Yeah. I mean, feel free to jump in anytime, but for me, like building out platforms and investigative teams is what I've been doing for a while. And whenever we build out these investigating teams, and I've gone to businesses and corporations and groups that have not done this before. Say it was after a pen test and we did a insider threat or red team engagement. We did an insider threat evaluation and say, hey, you need to establish a team inside. And it always comes down to I guess three things in it. That's trust, user trust, and that comes down with that. And the big thing with user trust is figuring out what makes people leave that user trust zone. What makes people go from being happy and trusted individuals to people who are no longer trusted individuals, or makes them drive that. So that's always one element. The second would be identifying how to get data out. So identifying ways that your content can leave. And then the last one, which is always I think it's one of the harder parts, is identifying how you can investigate these. How do you monitor users? How do you monitor users without losing that circle of trust, as well as how do you investigate things properly, and what can you investigate? Whether that be ethical or by law. And I think I find those three areas to be always a way to, they somewhat fight each other and sense that you have to have a good balance to form these insider threat teams and investigative platforms.
Yeah, I think that approach is fundamentally right. The thing I would probably overlay on it is thinking very clearly about your controls. And I think we think very one-dimensionally about controls. Like, hey, can I monitor it? Can I detect it? Can I block it? Can I allow it? Whereas, if you open the aperture a little bit and you're thinking about it, controls really separate activity and behaviors into two categories, right? It's good and bad, right? But with your detections, you're really narrowing that down. You're saying I have a known good and a known bad. Well, that leaves open now your idea for like a unknown good, right? Which I would venture to say a lot of what you see on even just networks, let alone behavior inside of an office or in just your employees, is unknown good. It's activity and behavior that maybe you're not detecting or monitoring on, but it just kind of fits into this area of we don't really have a way to check on it, but we're pretty sure it's okay. And then the area that insider fits into is unknown bad, right? Like if most of your stuff is unknown good, but you know known good, you know what you have to allow, like what you whitelisted, what you've intentionally said that I want to have there. And then you know what you want as your known bad. But like in those gray areas there, that really unknown bad is really where you need to start saying, all right, what's in that area that we need to control? What do we accept as a risk? for me, when I'm looking at programs, a lot of the times you have that unknown area is way larger than you might be expecting, right? Like that's the first area there, is to get a grasp on like, all right, what are we just accepting as like, we're pretty sure this can't be done. And then how do you start narrowing that unknown bad down? I think a great example is I told the story, on like in a Twitter thread, but like, that we had a organization, I was helping them out, and they were trying to set up inside a threat program. They said, hey, we're going to approach this from just like, what do we know? What does everybody know is a bad behavior? And that's pornography on the network. You know, you can't view porn at work. And they were sure that no one was viewing porn at work. And when they put in detection controls, they were like, oh my God, there is a lot of not just porn, but like, you know, illegal activity happening on our networks. And when they looked at it by the segmentation, that they were like, all right, this is happening a lot in like, you know, engineering or, you know, like areas that you can't just say, oh, we're going to fire everybody who's doing this. Well, you don't know, right? You don't know necessarily what that is because you haven't had those detections. Just because, like, I think we all know, just because a file is found somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that that person was even interacting with it. Doesn't mean that there was some kind of real maliciousness. It can be as simple as somebody sent an email through your network that had a illicit image in it, and that image now is spread throughout there, and somebody happened to save it and store it in some place that now a bunch of machines have touched. And because you have something like that, now you have to go and do you investigate every case? No. Well, do you fire everybody? You know, you can't do that. And that's also an HR issue. What's your investigative background? Do we have an ability to do that? The way they had to approach it was they said, listen, we're going to spend the next 8 months not doing any of this detection, not doing any of the, you know, algorithmic configuration that we wanted to. And we just have to do a massive education program to re-educate our populace about what the policy is, and then gradually implement the better detection and controls around it. Then when you get down to those, like, now we have that awareness, now we have detection, be able to know what turn our unknown bad into a known bad is, then we can focus in on it. And they didn't even touch Insider in that. That was just like finding out like what they didn't know about the network, be able to narrow the scope enough to be able to create a detection and then be able to take an action on it. I think the Insider becomes a lot more complicated because you can narrow it into categories, but a lot of those times you're not going to be monitoring for those categories. And to Greg's point, you may not have the partnerships internally that you need in place to deal with. Just, I mean, think about in that one instance that I talked about, you're dealing with high-level stakeholders in HR, in business units, in like legal has to get involved in it. Maybe you have an outside investigative firm that's going to be doing it. Maybe you have an outside firm that's helping you figure out how do you create the detection because you haven't really done it. And let's be honest, DLP and UBA, every time I've ever talked with anybody, and this is since their inception, has always been, well, you know, they're getting better. So like, I think that's kind of the perpetual problem there. So it's really just about, you know, finding out first what you really just don't know. And I'm betting it's a lot.
Is there a DLP platform that either one of you likes? Or
No.
Are they all just not there yet?
No, I spent 3 months evaluating DLP platforms, and I can honestly say exactly what that quote you said with, you know, they're getting better. It's basically my evaluation of it. My solution was to use multiple and layers, and it shouldn't have to be that way. But I honestly, the state of DLP, I think is not there at all. And for anyone using a single solution DLP, I can't imagine them to be, hopefully they're not relying on that heavily. There's so many loopholes for every single DLP platform. And let me tell you, I went through both cloud-based, local-based, hybrid, you know, bring in your own DLP box into your network and, you know, have it report to that. I did all three, and none of them provide adequate solutions anywhere.
What are the top 3 things you guys look for when you're building, or actually, what are the top 3 behaviors or characteristics you look for in terms of identifying an insider threat? Or is it mostly reactive?
And pertains to, what do you like with that? What do you mean? Do you pertain to, so for when I look at these, you have to have one thing I always look for is what are the attackers going to get? What are they after? So you always look for goals. And then I work backwards from goals. Like, what is at risk first? Is it intellectual property? Is it identifications? Is it financial? Is it just to cause disorder inside your organization? And then I work backwards from that. So how would someone get to those? How would someone obtain those? Who has access to those? Why do they have access to those? And then from there, I look at what are those people? Who are these individuals, and who do they interact with? Why do they interact with those other groups of people, and how do they do their job? So I always work backwards when I look at insider risk and insider threats. I found that to be the easier method for, at least from a blue team or purple team standpoint, where those, as a red team, I also do the same thing. I look at what am I going to gain? How am I going to obtain it? And who do I need to leverage, or what groups of people do I need to exploit in order to get to that data?
I subdivide the problem. I think about it in terms of, inside malicious and outside malicious.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that nobody says about insider is almost all an insider threat, or at least the traditional insider that we all think about, has an outside nexus. And the outside nexus is going to be because we're humans, right? Like, so if I want to, let's look at three kind of classic ones, would be espionage, like foreign government espionage. Two would be financially motivated, like, sales or sales of insider information, stuff like that. And then the third one would be just like, internal destruction, right? Like I'm mad and I want to make somebody pay for this. Almost all three of those have some type of external nexus, right? Like even the third one, it's an insider that just wants to cause damage. Almost always they cause the damage because they're outside the organization now, right? I think it's important to remember that insider threat programs, for the most part, exist in more mature organizations, right? Like if you're a mom and pop shop and you're doing like sales, you're worried about somebody stealing out of your till, but you're really not thinking about like a deep insider threat type of thing. I think as you mature and it becomes more of a program, you start thinking about like, all right, first off, what do you actually have in place that sits at that boundary of like insider external threat? Because realistically, if you have monitor detection controls in a SIEM, it's going to be really hard to tell what's actually insider and what's actually, outside. If I'm an insider, or if let's say I've had some kind of collaboration there and I willingly place malware on my machine, I mean, half the time your detections aren't going to be able to find it during like the filter. If you have if you have NetFlow turned on, most of the time it's going to be found because like AV or something or EDR pops onto the endpoint and you're like, oh, something happened. Or they popped open an email that they returned in phishing because they already clicked on it. The user's trying to cover their tracks and be like, oh, I reported a phishing email. Did you click on it? Well, I don't know. I have a lot of emails that I go through. I mean, that's just the most common thing. Now you're looking at that. If I were an outsider and I had somebody on the inside, listen, all you got to do is click on this email. Just click on this link and you're at the position. I know where you are. Maybe that's a mistake. Maybe that's real. Does it really matter as far as the implementation? No. So I would say that a lot of times you're looking at things like, hey, how do we begin scoping those boundaries of, we were really talking about identity, right? Like what is true? What is not true? Where do I look at things like, can somebody, who can access what systems? How do they access it? Is it simple password or in creds, or do we have like MFA turned on? Is it, how do we represent what what is legitimate or is not legitimate? How can somebody still log in? What's our exit procedures for somebody who's leaving? How do we make sure that we've cut access? Do we check on that? Do we have things like domain admin? Is it like turned on? Because by default, like a domain admin can create other domain admins. Do we have it like is it like, turtles all the way down? Domain admins forever. Like everybody's like, yeah. Like, so like, and that's simple identity stuff. And that really gets to that nexus of like, hey, where is that internal external? Who has the permissions to move stuff across that kind of that layer there, that membrane? Then the other side of that is looking at the human element. And I really do think that a lot of times in security, we wall ourselves off and we don't think about like humans, especially in large networks, probably have a lot of ways in and out of systems that we don't know about, that we haven't thought about. It can be as simple as somebody has used, like somebody in marketing saw something else new. They signed up for their one user account that they could use, but they're pushing and pulling files from our network out to that single user account that helps them make marketing materials. And maybe they don't know whether it's transparent or not, or what actually has that access to that data. Hey, they wanted my Salesforce login to do this stuff. So I typed in my Salesforce login, and now that system has access to our data. And maybe you consider that highly, highly proprietary. A lot of words would. And it can go to the other extreme too, where you're saying it like, what what's our level of trust here? Like as security people, we often just don't talk with HR very much. Or if we do, we recognize like HR probably has their own investigative team. HR is almost always going to be looking into credit cards. If you have corporate cards, if there's reason to investigate, they almost always keep those investigations completely closed loop. And they may look into instances of like internal fraud. They may look into instances of employees who are harassing or abusing others, all of which are kind of more extreme behaviors, particularly if they've emerged. And that should be something that's one of the reasons they always say, like, do you have some kind of group there? Do you have some kind of partnership where you can share that information? A lot of HR programs don't. And now that may sound like, oh, well, they have to keep that stuff private and all those things. And I get that, but you're dealing with humans. Humans are complex people. So if I were from an outsider perspective to flip that around and tell you a narrative of somebody who gradually was increasingly harassing or belligerent towards other people, and they got reported on it, was fraudulently using or abusing corporate credit cards. And then they also seemed to just get a lot of malware on their internal system because they kept not clicking on stuff. But all three of those are completely siloed away. As an external person, you'd be like, well, why aren't you looking at that? Oh, because none of those things talk to each other. And those aren't technical barriers. Those are human barriers. Those are because we purposely silo things off there and don't think about the people that we actually have working for us.
Now, both of you guys were talking about identifying what a company has that would put them at risk, whether it's the data, financial motives. How do you determine if an insider is doing something they should not be doing with, let's say, IP? If using that IP is a daily part of their job? Because I think that's where it becomes a little nebulous in trying to identify the malicious behavior before it's found out.
I think John absolutely hit the nail on the head when he discussed how teams need to identify how other teams, where your blue team needs to identify how their teams need to operate and how they access their data. I recently was, forming a investigative team, and one of the things we did was we interviewed all the engineers and how they access that data, and it was exactly like you said. It was like we had controls or identifications in place for them to operate on a normal day-to-day basis, but then they said, oh, but if this system is down, or when the system is not responding, we go do this. And we were like, we never even knew that way, that path of how they put their credentials in, how they uploaded these documents to this folder, or this share was accessed, and that share was never monitored because that share shouldn't have existed. Identifying where your users and your humans, or even the automated tasks and other things, because let me tell you, automated tasks and your things can be abused by insider attackers, and we see that quite a lot. Where they get their data, where they integrate with their data, how data moves, and where it goes is very key to identifying how data gets abused. And when you have IP, and that's a particularly fun one to do because of how flexible it is. And we see attackers doing everything from, this is my day-to-day task, and all of a sudden I start siphoning a little bit away, or I start gathering a little bit of that, and they kind of like squirrel harvesting a little bit of that data away, to the right before I leave my company, I'm going to grab this entire folder and everything in between. So identifying their day-to-day activities versus key events, like such as right before firing, or right before a conflict occurs at work, and knowing that and having a team to identify when users are at different emotional states or different states that they are, and start putting these controls in place. That's also a very key thing to do. And the most successful teams I've worked with have places like what John mentioned, where they investigate, where they integrate with all forms of the teams and say, hey, this person they control this amount of data. And recently we noticed that they're acting differently, or they express to other employees that they're depressed or something of that nature. And now we're going to start cranking up the controls on that data and say, hey, maybe this access is going more frequent, or they're accessing data all of a sudden at 2 a.m. instead of when during work hours and such. So yes, identifying those key vectors and those trigger points, I think is vital.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add on that, because I think that's a really great summary. Like, data flows in weird ways, right? And like, yep. I would say, like, especially in DevOps, when you're looking at it, I would go so far as to say you probably don't know how it's how it's really flowing. I mean, there's more than, you got to remember, the business is the business to be like making money. It's not in to produce things. It's usually not in the business for like the most secure type of practice. I mean, the number of orgs that just shut off EDR for dev machines, or at least for certain times, because like, listen, it slows down their machine. They can't compile, and it's going to take them too long. It's disruptive, because we all know those, like, we've all worked at an organization that has 30 plus user agents running on endpoints, and it's absolutely terrible. You turn on your system, you walk away to go get a coffee for 15 minutes and you come back. And like devs can't work in that environment. They're doing enough of that already. So, maybe they're doing something offline. And I go so far as to say it's not just them. It's a marketing department that happens to like be registering domains for every new activity that they're doing. And then, throwing that up to their own separate like cloud thing, that they've got video storage, and turns out the video storage company just allowed you to upload files. So they're loading up PDFs that age out. Nobody's checking on them. They're loading up financial documents because, hey, we needed a place to move it. Maybe they're loading up customer data because somebody in marketing happens to know somebody over in your customer team. Customer needed to move a big file, and the only thing they have to do it is either a slow service that they pay for that's clunky, or, hey, this marketing thing seems really fast to upload and download. Let's move the file over there, right? Like, you just have to talk with these teams.
And yeah, I was going to say it's okay. I was going to say that's a very good point to add. Is insider threat can also be the accidental insider threat, and I have seen that element lead to just as many breaches as intentional or insider threat with intent. Is the insider threat without intent, or insider threat who accidentally does exactly that. And that's what you mentioned is very, it's key, because a lot of people don't realize that it's if you don't educate your users how to properly use tools and platforms, you will have data leaks. You will have users who have accidentally abused systems and misproperly used systems, and that leads to security events.
And that's probably like that. We see that all the time, like low-level criminals who have absolutely no background, no real access, no hacking skills whatsoever. They're not even like, they can't even just like, script something. They're going on GitHub. They're scraping some data off of there. Happens to have either internal keys or something else. Maybe it's some internal data or something. Maybe it's technical docs, because a lot of people use GitHub for not just code, right? Yep. Pulling it down and saying, I have an insider and I've hacked XYZ organization to build cred on some low tier forum. And now your data's out there, right? Like, do they really have an insider access? No. Is it going to make you run absolute circles to try and find it? Yeah.
Well, I mean, look at Lapsus with the Microsoft DevOps screenshots. Had Microsoft not actually admitted to it being an incident, now that's a situation I think you're outlining. No one would have known if it actually happened. What are you guys' thoughts on Lapsus and how they operated? That is, if they're done for now.
Lapsus is a little near and dear to me, in the sense that they are the accused reportedly is an autistic kid, teenager who has done a lot of social engineering, a lot of low-level hacks that have escalated to compromising large amounts of data. And I mean, I was arrested at the age of 14 for virus writing. I was probably, I think I still am the youngest individual charged with computer fraud in the state of Arizona. Doing that, I mean, being a young autistic kid, I was very interested in that whole law versus, excitement of doing something bad and not realizing the actual implications of it. I wasn't breaking into companies and extorting them out of millions of dollars. I was doing something much less. But what they're able to do is they're able to bypass millions and millions of dollars worth of security mitigations and practices in place with very low tech. And to me, the biggest thing that we can take from Lapsus is we are spending our money in the wrong places. We are putting our resources in identifying attackers and would-be insider threats in the wrong places. They've used very low tech methods, such as buying keys and session keys online for as little as $10 in order to gain access into your Slack channels and your other, your inside applications doing very little. And with that, they're able to social engineer themselves around and move themselves around the networks. And to me, that is going to be the next space that people need to identify and move their resources into. If you haven't done it already, they're going to be a platform that other attackers are going to use and mimic and use it. Hey, these strategies work for them. And now, if you even think about it, like the large players, the large, we're talking about the government, government level attackers. They're also going to look at the nation states are going to look at these strategies and be like, well, if this worked for them, we can also mask our activities in doing the same way. Why not use the same, same methods that these people are using to get similar results? And that is where I see a lot of future attacks are going to be, buying these tokens, buying these session keys, doing these low level attacks, the permissions that they're doing, or sorry, the pushes that they're doing for your multi-factor authentication, spamming individuals until they accept. That is going to be the new standard. If you haven't turned that off on your push notifications on your multi-factor authentication apps, do it now, because that's going to be useless. We've already seen a huge increase in that strategy being employed now. So they're a platform for attackers to idolize. And I think it's going to be that way for quite some
time. Not as near and dear necessarily with Lapsus, but I kind of get where, like, when I was growing up, I certainly never did anything that, well, probably nowadays it gets you arrested, but like, back in the day, schools had like stuff like WebSense, and you'd play around with that and be like, oh, well, how fast am I going to break through this thing? But I think there's something to be said for the level at which you need to be at to be able to use the tools that you have available now. That space has gotten a lot smaller. Like, you could play around with like Backorifice or like, Backtrack as it came out there, and it was all very kind of manual. You could move your way through a system because the controls were just absolutely lax, and it wasn't hard, but there's a lot of little pieces that you had to learn along the way there. Nowadays, you don't really need a lot. You don't have to do, big discovery, or you don't have to, nobody creates their own rainbow tables anymore. And I'm not trying to say sound like the old grandfather, like back in my day, we had to scrape passwords ourselves and make rainbow tables. You don't have to do that. Genesis Market is a great example of like what that is. And I say it because it's not new. It's been around for years now. And that there's a friggin' browser, application. That's how it works. You download this browser extension, you put it in there, and it mimics token keys to be able to match the fingerprinting for these sites. Somebody has automated that. There's no human interaction. It's just a store. It's literally a storefront that you go on there. You can pay in multiple ways, really friendly customer service, and you just buy whatever you want there. They even give you the first, I think it's couple octets to know which, IP ranges am I looking at and how can I narrow it down? What is the user actually logged into right now? And I think makes it the barriers to entry for anybody, very, very low skilled anyone to be able to get in and do this type of stuff is, I think, lower than it ever has been before. You don't even have to have a super deep interest in it. You just have to have enough of a passing interest, and somebody has to show you 2-3 sites and you're in. I think the second thing is that's not going away. And I think that trend is actually going to accelerate. It will become easier and easier to get into systems. I remember when Metasploit came out, everybody's like, oh, this is great. I can't believe those weren't new techniques. Somebody just put it into a system and automated it. More and more you're seeing scripted attacks. It's not like the volume of attacks is going down. We have better systems to be able to maintain on it. But that whole AI machine revolution as slash our security tools getting more sophisticated, that didn't just happen on the security side, but that's a trailing indicator of what's happening over on the criminal side / nation state side. They're evolving and doing things much faster and making those barriers to entry much, much lower than they ever have been. I say that to say that means that groups like Lapsus, that's not new. You may think that SIM swapping is something there, but this is what, I'll be honest, if I were in high school, that whole either if I were in high school, but especially if I were in high schools, particularly in places like Indonesia or anywhere else there where there's whole hacking clubs and stuff, SIM swapping super common. They have defacement boards. Those are not those hacking crews and teams. Those are not anything new. They're just they go to websites, spray paint it down, put their own creds on it. It's down for maybe 10 seconds. but then they like say, hey, look, I took a screenshot, I took this site down, and they do it for bragging points. And those attacks are getting more sophisticated because the ways that we keep websites up are getting better. And so they're naturally just becoming better, and they're moving up a chain. There's a lot of teams. There are not one Lapsus. There's easily hundreds to thousands of Lapsuses out there. This just happens to be the one that got, marginal success with a couple of places and was really broadly public about it. So like, I think that's probably for me, the one thing I would say is like, this is not, this one instance is just highlights 2 points. One, a lot of low level, I don't want to say low level skills. It's easier to approach now, and it's easier to gain the skills with a lot more variety of tools than you ever had before, to be able to do massive damage, and the damage is getting a lot worse because you have all this tooling. And the second thing is there's now like one group. You shouldn't just be focusing on threat actor campaign Lapsus, right? Like there's a lot of these groups, and some of them are going to pop hot, some of them are going to get lucky, and you have to be aware of what they're doing, because you're not dealing with a single scope attacker. You're dealing with a lot of kids who can be really, really creative. I'll close this note with like, I think my favorite tale of this is what you're really dealing with is, in like post World War II, there was this British tank. I can't think of the name of it, but it's a famous British tank. And this thing was absolutely indestructible. It was clouded at the time of being like, no one can destroy this tank. You beat it up. It's user proof. It's hard to do anything. They opened it up in a museum and let a bunch of kids run through it. Like literally like 6 to 8 year old kids just run through it. At the end of the day, it was absolutely unserviceable, because kids know how to get into it, and they'll do stuff that no one will think of just because why not? They'll just try little things over time. And that's what you're experiencing, is a bunch of small teams, a bunch of individuals testing your network constantly, testing things out constantly, seeing if they'll work. Maybe one time they get lucky and now they tell their friends about it. And that's what you're trying to deal with, is like, you're dealing with a lot of like small little cracks that if they add up, if you don't have strong controls, if you're not really constantly thinking about where do I have, unknown good, unknown bad activity happening that I completely not monitoring for, that will be found out. And it's going to be found out faster than ever, because the barriers for entry for anybody doing this stuff are lower than ever.
I'll add one last, sorry, I was going to say, I'll add one last thing to that. Lapsus, is essentially, mid-range, low level tactics and low level, hacking. But what makes them successful is their marketing. It's just like security products out there. Security products that have mid-range to low-level capability. But if you're marketing and you're pushing out what you're doing into a manner that is ingestible by the public, and i.e. having your own Telegram channel and advertising these hacks in big manners and having people replay, that's what makes you successful. Is that.
I have a question for you, John, just because with what you guys do at the day job, have you seen, or what do you think the likelihood is that there's going to be a post-mortem on all the companies that Lapsus hit in the last 2-3 months that can be reconciled against each other? Compare the TTPs and any differences and just see exactly what they did across, say, 3 or 4 major multinationals.
I mean, someone's going to do it. It might be us. I don't know. Someone's going to do it, but the flip side to that is, to Greg's point, you're not talking about a kid that figured out how to, basically create a new computer inside of like, Apple Messenger and like, run, malware from there. Like, you look at, extremely sophisticated, like far to the right, like groups, that's not what they're doing. That's not the level of tactics there. Sure, you can go down and figure out the TTPs, and ideally in at least a minimally compliant world, we would look at all the low level things and then patch them. But I think that also leads to part of the problem, right? Like, there's a guy I follow, his name is Frode Homedal, and he one time gave this talk he's a Norwegian information security person, and he gave this talk talking about the the hamster wheel and or security whack-a-mole. And basically what happens is you patch that one thing, but then you left open all the other things because you haven't really post-mortem, haven't really gone through and said, all right, these are the things that, not just that direct attack, but these are the things that are similar. So the patch may work, but have we really thought about how do we use this to inform strengthening our actual processes going forward and strengthening what we're using as detection across our network. So we're not just, playing that whack-a-mole game of we patched the one thing, they came back with something similar. Well, we patched it again, and you get stuck in that cycle.
One of the things that really bothered me about the, Okta Lapsus incident is I got emails from vendors I've used 5 years ago, vendors I use today, telling me that they're monitoring the situation and they are aware of it and hunting for the same types of threats in their systems. And, I was bored one night or one day and I tweeted out, what exactly are they looking for? Because as you and Greg just explained, it's the low-level basic things. It's social engineering and buying tokens on a marketplace. So it goes back to the message that these security companies are putting out. What are they actually doing in that particular situation?
I'll come from the technical side, and I know that's not going to be that's not the holistic answer, right? No, that's really the true one. But the technical side is these companies, basically, if you get an incident like this and you're looking at this, the first thing you're doing is you're looking at the base level technique. And the base level technique was cred harvesting, bots on Genesis Market and things like that. So I can tell you that almost every company out there that has a security team and almost every security researcher team probably did a couple things. One, for our own company, what do we touch? Anything that's been in the news or been in a news headline, what do we touch? Because that's what our customers are going to be asking us for, right? So if it's any one of those companies that's listed in the Telegram thing, every company in America, every company in Europe probably is going through their vendor list and being like, do we do business with them? Do they have any of our data? What's going on? And then the flurry of security surveys go out following it to say what has happened? What do you do? And that thing. And that's, on one hand, that's a compliance thing. On the other hand, they're trying to do information gathering just to see what was basically exposed. We can have debates all day long about whether that's effective or not, but that's from the technical side of what's happening. The other thing that's happening is that organizations are going through there that are using threat intelligence, that are being a little bit more proactive about things. They're saying all right, what do we have for exposure for things like basic cred harvesting? Do we have some kind of monitoring? What's our pathway for storing and identifying leak credentials that we happen to discover? What's the discovery mechanism? How are we remediating it? What do I have? And that's an internal metric, right? That's because their own boards are going to be asking them, what are we doing about this? And they want to be able to report up, well, we have a program in place, because everybody does, about being able to identify if we get a leaked credential, if we find out this is how long it takes us. This is our SLA for recycling and resetting passwords. What are we doing about that? And then the third thing is maybe they're even talking with their vendors and their threat intelligence vendors and saying, hey, do you guys monitor this? Are you guys in the chat? Are you guys looking at other groups of this? What other groups do we have to be worried about? Who else is using Genesis Market? Answer, it's kind of everybody, to Greg's point. And what's our stuff on there? Where's it going for? And some of them are asking questions that hopefully allow them to be educated. Should we go on to Genesis Market anytime we see something, one of our things pop up there, and just buy up the whole lot? It's hold on. That's that. If you want to create a market, that's how you create a market for your own hacking. Don't do that. But those are the steps technically that organizations are doing. Now, I'm actually going to pass this over to Greg so that I don't take up all the air, but you can debate on whether that's productive, whether that's what should be being done. But those are what organizations are doing when they say, hey, I see this and this is how, and we're reacting to it.
Let me tell you, I did all three this week. Or last week, to your statement. The other thing I'm going to add on to that was, what I did is, what other people should be doing is we took their methods that they publicly announced, how they use to get into these companies, and we applied that to our insider threat and monitoring systems. For one, they were jumping onto users and resetting MFAs. So we made sure that every single MFA that got reset, we had a log to look back to say that we did that MFA reset, or it was requested by the user, and make sure that you have multiple verification methods for resetting those MFAs. A user should never be able to reset their MFA alone. They have to, consult to your internal tech team and say, hey, I lost my I lost my device, or my device was reset. I need to get back in. And then you have to go out and reach out to that person and have a method that you can validate them, and validate that's who you're talking to. And that's, we got to make sure that you have that in multiple areas, not just your MFA tokens, for everything, every single, transaction that's, inside the company should also be going through these multiple factor authentications, because let me tell you, attackers are doing voice changing software. They're using deep faking software. There was that successful one where the individual was able to have, multi-millions of dollars deep fakes from a phone call. So make sure you have that in place. The other thing was making sure that geolocation was, for your logged in users was enabled. Surprisingly, we found, with Lapsus, said that they were able to log into multiple places from users without even geolocating, proper geolocation of those users. If you don't have geolocation locking on your users, or at least alerting when your users logged into multiple places, A, or B, logged into across a country or across the world in Lapsus's case, you need to do that now. That is absolutely pivotal, and it's surprising me. It just surprised me when they said they did that and they didn't have immediate flags go off. That is absolutely the three things that we did, and everything from there is we looked at anything that had to deal with attacker, like the VPN or the attackers leveraging MFA vulnerabilities to our users, and looking for going back to history from January 21st or around that area, and going back and going to modern. And that's what I advised all companies to have done who are involved in that.
Yeah. And I think Greg's absolutely right. Like thinking like as the Defender network, those are the two things. The other two things that I think it put out there is probably one backward looking and one forward looking. The backward looking is retro hunt. You're going to find stuff as you look back, as you're looking at indicators, and then you got to dig them to the ground. Like you just popped open a whole bunch of new tickets at like a bunch of companies across, the world, because they're now like, oh, well, what do we have here? Something happened here. Maybe we had a detection on this. We didn't dig into it, or we dismissed it. And now we got to go back and take a look at them. The second thing is forward looking. You have organizations that are going to be taking each of those tactics and taking a closer look at them as they map them to, I know more and more organizations are using things like MITRE ATT&CK. MITRE ATT&CK's okay, but mapping it to whatever their system is, and really thinking about hey, how are we applying and defending against this? Structurally, you should be getting your architects on the phone, and they should be talking with vendors of saying one or two things. One, internally, how we're mapping this to structure this out to make sure that we're defended. Two, if we have gaps, where are we using vendors to help fill those gaps to make sure that we have, remediations in place. Keep people happy.
Yeah.
Oh, I probably say the one note that I'd say on Insider is I always throw this out there in any chat and any talk I ever do. Don't be creepy. The first thing people think of with Insider Threat is they want to go and start monitoring all their employees' social media accounts. They want to start adding all these additional guardrails and monitoring, particularly in this work from home space. And it's that is the creepiest thing. Don't be creepy. There's no reason for it. And that whole thing that we talked about right at the beginning about you creating trust, understanding your user trust, it is absolutely vital to your security program. And the easiest way to break any of that trust is by going around and doing all those creepy news stories that you hear about companies and organizations that are installing basically spyware, because that's what it is, on endpoints, or trolling social media accounts and trying to enforce some type of policy on people's don't do those things, because that's how you break that user trust. That's how you build these walls and the resentment with your teams that you need.
I can safely say that since work from home started, we have successfully convinced every employer that asked to not implement ActiveTrack or any version of software like it. It's exactly what you said. If they're getting the work done, leave them be. As long as they're hitting their deliverables when they have to, that's all that should matter.
That's fair. As someone who's seen quite a bit, I think, of quite a bit of insider attacks, I'll let you know that insider attacks is absolutely a threat that's occurring more often than people realize too. That's another thing. I'm seeing actual attacks where, like I mentioned, I saw a 6-digit figure being passed to an individual just to do minimal activity, and that activity has been everything from just clicking on a link in an email, like you mentioned earlier. Hey, this is going to be the phishing email that you're going to click, and you're going to run this Excel document, and you're going to put this password in, and you're going to act like it was just an everyday item. To dead dropping content on a GitHub. I've seen that where, individuals, a dev person, and say, hey, all we want you to do is, accidentally upload this or put this to your GitHub, and that way we can contact you. The insider threat action space is very, very, it's getting very advanced, and not many people are talking about it. The strategies being in place, attackers are motivated at this point, especially with the move from home. Attackers are leveraging, no one's in the office anymore. So attackers are coming up with these new methods to get these insiders and get these individuals to do more activity. And then without the advanced monitoring in place, your data can go to more, can be traveled through more interesting locations. Attackers are knowing that people are working from home and using that to their advantage as well. There's less monitoring in place, less DLP from working from home. All you have to, just straight up a VPN and whatever, encapsulations that you're having in place, behavior monitors, et cetera. And attackers know this, and they're leveraging attacks against that. I've seen quite a bit of insider threats in the last several years, and being a red team member, I have participated in quite a lot of red team fun insider threat attacks. My favorite one is I did a red team for a development and company, and where as a red team member, I looked on the website, I saw that they had openings for a position of job. I said, hey, I was qualified for this, I'm going to apply for a job. And I was actually on the payroll for 2 weeks as a red team member for that engagement. And I leveraged myself. I coded for the company. I had coffee with members. I literally showed up to the office for several days. And then after the post, after our 2-week engagement was done, let me tell you, my hiring manager was brought into the room where we were doing the results and showing the pen test results, or red team results. And my hiring manager was like, oh, hi, what are you doing here? I thought you left the company. You're a short-term worker. And the team was like, actually, interesting thing you said that he was actually on the red team and evaluating the company. And that is, unfortunately, I got that strategy from monitoring real-world attackers and what they have done. A lot of my red team engagements and red team strategies are absolutely that kind of strategy. I'll tell you, one of the most interesting red team insider threat strategies I have ever seen was while in Southeast Asia, we were monitoring a group of hospitals out there, and they kept having insider threats. They kept noticing modifications of networks, and at first they thought it was a breach, but then they started realizing that the data and the areas that were attacking were actually only accessible by employees. And after monitoring this, we noticed that yes, the data was in air-gapped locations and areas that were monitored and where users only had access to. And so, without much of the details of the attack, we came to the conclusion that these employees were being paid. And what they were doing is they were modifying the contents of 1 or 2 files, and then they would exit. And so during the investigation, we were like, well, so, what is these 1 or 2 files that they're monitoring? All it seems to be was a list of names. And what it turned out was that list of names was for organ transplant, and the list of people who were on the organ transplant, and what they were doing is they were manipulating who got organs, who didn't get organs, and putting people up the list. And this was actually facilitated by a organized crime unit who is taking money and saying, hey, do you need these organs? We'll put you higher on the list for X amount of money. And then later paying that employee a fraction of the cost to move that person up on the list. So that was absolutely a time where insider threat led to possibly cases of human death, or, at the worst case, human death or manipulation of life. And that was an extreme case, but that gives you an example of the level of insider threat and how far it can go.
I want to thank Greg and John for coming on today. Greg, John, how do the people get in touch with you if you want them to get in touch with you? That is,
you can always contact me on Twitter. I'm laughing_mantis on there. My DMs are always open. Feel free to say hi. I'll happily talk about Insider Threat and any other type of cybersecurity relevant news. I always like hearing people's experiences. I like sharing experiences. We're in this together, so it's always fun to hear from you all and making sure that everyone's safe and happy.
Yeah, same. Reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at John Wetzel. I'm always happy to chat. DMs are open. More than happy to discuss, Insider Threat. I did it for way too long at DoD during the interesting time when DoD was setting up actually more formal Insider Threat programs for compliance for all the DoD contractors. So, yeah, always happy to chat.